Teachers, when did karmic justice finally come to that one troublesome student? Had a kid who was a real jerk when I taught 5th. This kid, let's call him Ray, had one of those moms who refused to hold him accountable for anything. It was always, some other kid did it. Ray was being targeted. Also, she was one of those moms who would ask Ray if he were guilty and take his no as incontestable truth. She would say, "My son doesn't lie to me." Oh, really? Your kid doesn't lie? Your kid and Jesus? All kids lie. Anyway, I had a full caseload as a special ed teacher, so I got a paraprofessional, call him Steve. Ray hated Steve, had some kind of issue with male authority figures. One day, Ray gets in trouble coming back from recess. Steve reprimanded him verbally. By the time Ray makes it to the classroom, he's saying how Steve got in his face and shouted at him. No. He asks to go talk to the principal. Oh, yay, Ray is gone for at least 5 minutes. Tells the principal how Steve grabbed his arm. When mom comes and gets him, now he's saying Steve pushed him. Next day, we get a phone call. Ray's mom and grandma are coming in and want a meeting with Steve and the principal to discuss how Steve choked Ray. Steve is freaking out. Other kids were there, but no adults, no cameras, and he has no way to prove his innocence. I tell him, go to the meeting, and before anybody says anything, have Ray share what happened. Steve came back smiling. As soon as one story came out, everybody else is disagreeing. Well, Ray told me, but Ray told me. I would have loved to see the mom's face as her kid is proven a liar in front of everyone. It's unfortunate that Ray, for whatever reason, has learned that lying gets him what he wants. I hope that behavior is, squeezed out of him gently, or at the very least just removed from his person. Not a great way to go about life. Story 2. Had a kid who threw a lock at my head not get expelled because it just slipped out of her hand. She got expelled a few months later for bringing a weapon to school. OP, this isn't karmic justice, you know that, right? The student just broke the rules twice and got punished once. And the second one just happened to be, extreme, to say the least. But I don't know if that's karmic justice, it's kind of just consequences. Story 3. We had these 2 kids, brother and sister combo, with fabulous names. Let's call them Princess and Major. Actually not bad kids, just a little lazy. But the parents were the laziest people. Did anything to not work, just sit around and exist. I'm surprised they had the motivation to get off their butts and procreate twice. Anyway, there was some excuse why homework wasn't done, and this was 4th grade inner city. So homework was stuff like reading a little booklet to your folks or practicing multiplication facts. The kids also missed school all the time. The kids were honest. Mommy didn't want to wake up and get us ready for the bus. Daddy was up late with his friends. So we report them to truancy. They turn around and find some lawyer to sue the school for their kids' underachievement. If the teachers were doing their jobs, these precious children should be pre-med students by now. Luckily, we kept really good records. The lawyer shows up, the principal, superintendent, truancy officer, our lawyer. Their lawyer starts in. Our principal breaks in, holds up his hand. Asks the truancy officer, how many days have these children missed? Ends up they've missed enough days in the last 3 years to equate more than a year of school. Principal says, now, ma'am, sir, how are we supposed to deliver a quality education to your children if you don't get them to school? Their lawyer quietly packed up their stuff and left. Story 4. I interned in a class with this kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was pretty smart, but not by that much. He always got paired with kids not as smart as him, so he would always be really smug when dealing with them. We learned he got that from his parents during a parent-teacher conference. His parents praised that boy up and down and thought he was the smartest kid in school. They built him up as that and they got him thinking that too. Then they went off on my mentor teacher. She wasn't providing him with higher enough education. She was bringing him down. She was terrible. The conference ended when my mentor teacher left the room crying after the verbal lashing. Well, about a week later, there was an event where parents came to watch their children in class. It was to watch them do math games with other students. Well, my mentor teacher paired this smug little bastard with the actual smartest kid in class, the one who was working on more advanced classes after school. The kid got shamed. His parents were so flustered during the event. They were very visibly nervous and upset looking as this kid got destroyed. Game after game. They left before it was all done and took him out of school for the rest of the day. Story 5. I coached middle school football. Some kids have come out of their shell by then and others have not. But at least most of the early bloomers were jerks to make life hell for everybody. The team's starting halfback was one of those jerks. He gave a defensive lineman hell, and since everyone thought he was cool, they gave him hell right along with him. The defensive lineman was a big guy, but not aggressive or outgoing. Still just in his shell, really. He did fine out there because he was a big guy, but hardly played to his potential. The little running backs took their Napoleon complexes out on the big guy by running by him and shouting "coward" every time he failed to stop them. Rather than fight back to make the play, he would just ignore it and line up and try again the next play. One day, the whole thing just clicked for the big guy and he started making plays. He learned to get off his blockers, tackle, and attack the ball carrier. It was a cool thing to see and he loved it. When he really started getting into a groove, I started running the jerk halfback right at the blooming defensive lineman and watched him plant that guy in the ground with a thud every time. It was just getting easier as I made sure they ran the same play at him play after play. Soon, bruised and beaten, the jerk halfback asked, "How many times are you going to run this play?" And I responded, "Once for every time you called him a coward." I mean, sort of props to the jerk for continuing to go with it at the very least. Like, I can imagine it's not super fun getting the crap beat out of you every single time, but it is some very nice karmic justice for picking on him. Hopefully the kid does learn a lesson from this and it's not just lost on him. Story 6. First grade here. Had a boy that would not stop hitting kids with basketballs. He would run up and pop the ball right at students. Sometimes he'd toss it real fast and say catch, but most often he would just throw it at children on the playground who were completely unaware. This kid seemed like he was trying to knock other children down. He would laugh his butt off if he saw someone stumble or fall after they were hit by his basketball. After talking with his parents, we told them we would be taking balls away from him until after spring break, in order to see if his behavior improved. As promised, he was allowed to play basketball again after break, but we warned he better behave. It didn't even take 5 minutes before he stalked and shot that Spalding special right at this poor little girl, knocking her down. She cried and pointed at him, mulch dangling from her hair. "He's mean, Miss O.P." I agreed and told her he'd have the basketballs taken away for the rest of the school year. As I got up and walked his way, he started to bolt. He ran out of the playground, past the sandpit, and onto the basketball court. He maintained eye contact with me, and before I could take another step, a stray ball from a 5th grade game hit the edge of the backboard, bounced off, and hit that little crap square in the face. He went down like a sack of potatoes. Of course, I ran over to him and made sure he was okay. He may be acting like a little jerk, but he's still a child. I called for the nurse since he was out cold. He woke up with me above him and started crying, saying he would never do it again. "Please, please, I'm so sorry, I won't do it again." I'll have to wait and see this coming year if karma kicked his butt or not, because he didn't want to pick up another basketball the rest of the school year. It is with this story I realized I have no idea how I would voice a little girl. No clue at all. Sorry about that. Story 7. I have a ton of stories, but this is the only one that made me laugh, because I'm a horrible person. I had a 5th grader who looked like a white version of Cleveland Brown Jr., right down to the hanging cheeks and no neck. This kid was a know-it-all menace. He'd interrupt me, do some weird Rihanna hand twirl, and say, "Well, actually, miss," and then state some random fact that was often wrong or irrelevant. Well, eventually, while on lunch duty, I see that his lunch every day is a can of soda, a bag of chips, and a ton of candy, like the bag is bursting at the seams. I alert the principal because I'm worried that his grandmother, who was raising him, wasn't feeding him properly. Principal calls the grandma, and grandma gets angry. She was letting him pack his own lunch and wasn't checking it, so she's embarrassed that we've called her on it. She tells us that she will only pack healthy food now. She then tells us that the kid's doctor said he needs a serious diet. She tells us that he cannot have any candy. Cut to a week later. The kid is still being a little jerk and ticks off another student. Student runs to principal and says the kid has been sneaking candy to school every day. The principal goes to talk to him. The kid shoves a chocolate bar into his mouth and the principal takes away the blow pop sucker he has. This kid proceeds to roll around on his belly across the entire hallway, screeching and crying so hard that he's choking on the half-chewed chocolate bar. Chocolate spittle and tears everywhere. A kindergarten student walks by and says, "You look like a baby." The kid stops wallowing long enough to punch the little student. He got suspended for violence, and I got a peaceful classroom. Story 8. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism. He was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance. He continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless TA, but joke's on him. He ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about 1 way to get an F. You can't argue about 3. Story 9. Mom is a retired college English teacher. She's had some creative plagiarists. Mom was marking one of the first essays of the semester. The paper was giving her déjà vu, but she couldn't quite figure out why. Finally, a line that caught her attention. Un-Canadian. The thing is, that really isn't a common colloquialism here. Un-American, however, is in the US. A light bulb went off and Mom found the essay. It was from Playboy in the 60s or 70s. The only change the student had made was to replace un-American with un-Canadian. Queen of Stupid was a student that plagiarized an essay from a textbook my mother used in another class. The student actually argued with the failure of that paper, all the way up to the dean. Finally, my mom said, "Look, I know you plagiarized. The essay is on page 86 of textbook." Had this girl just taken the fail, she would have needed to repeat the class at a cost of $500, $600, but lesson learned. No. This girl thought she could con the administration. As a result of getting caught plagiarizing and it coming to the dean's attention, her student records were flagged with a note that she was a plagiarist. The college had a 2-strike rule. Don't know if she did it again, but how stupid can you be to plagiarize a common textbook and then argue about it? Cheaters really just have no shame, huh? Like, you plagiarize, sure. You get caught on it? I feel like you have to fess up because they know, because it's plagiarism, so they know where you got it from. You can't really argue that, right? I don't know. I feel like if I were cheating, I would just be like, all right, I take the L on this one, don't do it again. But I also wouldn't plagiarize, so maybe it's a moot point. Story 10. Not a teacher, but one time when I was in kindergarten, a kid looked me straight in the eyes, bit himself on the wrist hard, and ran to the teacher and blamed me. That little jerk. They sent me to the principal's office and my mom was called down. I got yelled at and cried. A week later, the kid did it again and the teacher saw him do it. Felt so good to have the principal apologizing profusely to me, while that little craphead got a mouthful from his parents. Story 11. Back in 5th grade, there was this kid I really didn't get along with. He was a pathological liar and would constantly act out in need of attention. Instead of just forgetting about it, I would always call him out, and that would escalate the conflict. One day, all the children in our grade were playing tag during recess. I was on the cops team and he was on the robbers. As I was chasing him around at one point, he suddenly turns around and pushes me as hard as he can and falls on the ground, crying. He then runs to his mother who worked as a teacher in the school. He tells her I punched him and pushed him onto the ground. As this is happening, a classmate of ours who saw everything goes up to her and is straight up telling her that he's lying. She doesn't hear any of it. Instead, she grabs me by the arm and takes me to the principal's office, where I get detention and a mark on my record. Upon returning to my classroom, I'm greeted by disgusted looks from all the girls in the class. Apparently, he had told them all his BS story and they swallowed it whole. Even though this happened over a decade ago, it's influenced me to this day to always stand up for others no matter the situation. That feeling of injustice completely changed my outlook on life and people in general. Hey, joke's on that kid though, because it sounds like OP developed a really strong sense of empathy. You fool, jerk child, you made OP a better person. Who's the real winner? Also, side note, I can't help but notice there's no karmic justice in this story, which is completely unsatisfying. How dare you, OP? Story 12. I was teaching music. I had a flutist who was fantastic. He practiced 4 hours every day and wanted to be the next to James Galway, guy who does the flute shire theme in The Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, he had an ego the size of Texas. He told the girl next to him, who also wanted to be a professional flutist, that she was abysmal and should just go end herself. He refused to audition for a local honor band, which was part of his grade, because he refused to lower himself to playing with such talentless musicians. He would complain about my conducting in class when I wouldn't cue him because I was too busy cueing the low brass, who needed help with their entrances, aka teaching. He refused to play a theme from a popular video game at a concert, something that we play to get people to attend because we need that money to keep the program going. It was apparently not artistic enough. Then he refused to show up to a concert because he was embarrassed to be seen performing with his high school band. So, he failed band, and I kicked that toxic little crap out. But he was talented and he wanted to be a flutist, so he auditioned for Juilliard and made it in. This dude quits before the first semester is over because he believed he was more talented than his teachers. He earned a symphony gig in a very well-known group thanks to a blind audition, where he wasn't permitted to talk, and as such couldn't reveal how much of a jerk he was. That lasted 2 weeks before he dissed the very famous conductors conducting and got his butt fired. His career is dead because he couldn't keep his ego in check, and I find that immensely satisfying. As someone who's been very involved in the arts my whole life, yes, seeing an ego get crushed like that is beautiful. Because if there's anything more central to art other than just, I don't know, being really good or whatever, it's the humanity of it all, I think. Art is intrinsically extremely human, and with that comes a level of understanding and compassion for fellow people. If you don't have that, you can't be an artist. I'm sorry. Not a true one, in my opinion at least. Story 13. Last year, had a 7-year-old in my class who was just a pain. He's the only kid I've ever taught who I've actually disliked. He would throw things around the classroom, pinch other children, stab them with pencils. He was rude to everyone and would always blame it on someone else. Talking to his parents wouldn't help because they believed everything he said, even over adults who had witnessed him doing it. They would give excuses and say that other children were blaming him or that he was being picked on. There was nothing wrong with this child other than that he had been brought up with no consequences in his life. Anyway, one break time he was harassing another child and I guess they just had enough. And this usually mild-mannered child just punched him in the stomach, causing the horrible child to wet himself. When following up with the incident, all of the other children who witnessed it, around 5 or 6, completely closed ranks, denied it ever happened. I can't usually condone when children hit back. It causes so many other problems. But you better believe all the adults that have had to deal with this child were rooting for the hitter. Story 14. 5th grade. A boy joined our class by being held back again. He often cussed the teacher, couldn't control himself, and due to being 2 years older but no bigger than the rest of us, he bullied people. Until one day, he bullied the wrong person. He drank my Coke. Now, I didn't get many Cokes in school because I rarely had the 50 cents for the Coke machine to get one. We were poor. I got free lunches, kind of poor. I told him to replace my Coke and he said, "No." Oh, it was on. I had him on the ground slamming his head through the floor. His nose was bleeding from hitting the floor and our teacher, who was thoroughly fed up with his crap, walks in the room, looks at me, looks at him, walks back out and closes the door behind her. He bought me another Coke and we were best friends after that. I mostly kept him out of trouble and helped him in class and he didn't get held back again. Young boy friendships are so strange because, yeah, I can absolutely see this happening or starting a friendship. So strange. It doesn't make any damn sense to me. But good for you, OP. I mostly mean for the aftermath of it, not the actual, beating the crap out of him. I don't want to condone that and say good for you, but I'm not going to say it was a bad idea. Anyway, moving on, before I incriminate myself or something. Story 15. I was in pre-K in the early 80s at a private Catholic school. This one kid, Amy, would always bite the other kids. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I guess one day I came home crying or had a really bad bite mark or something and my mom was furious. She took me straight to the superintendent, not the principal, and showed her what happened. The superintendent, a really old nun, did not put up with that crap. She called Amy into her office and bit her arm. Amy started crying, but she never bit anyone again. Old nuns in the 80s were hardcore. Note, I'm not saying what happened was right, just that it happened. Bro, yes, old nuns hardcore for sure, but pre-K? You cannot bite a 3 or 4-year-old's arm. No, don't do that, man. Anyway, whatever. Story 16. I taught a comparative anatomy animal dissection lab section back in college. I had one kid in a section, let's call him Kevin, who never listened to dissection instructions and just dove in with a scalpel, dicing and chopping and generally mutilating most of the internal organs. His first karmic warning came when we were dissecting a squid. He got squid juice on himself, smelled awful for the rest of the class. However, he kept on ignoring instructions and hacking away. This time, karmic justice struck on our very last dissection project, the fetal pig. Kevin really wanted to see the pig's brain. Kevin couldn't get through the skull, so he started whacking away at it with the butt of a flat pry knife. I told him to stop, but he had to give it one last mighty thwack. Crack! The skull breaks, and rubbery piglet brain bits come flying out everywhere, mostly over Kevin, splattering him. Unfortunately, while protesting my refusal to let him dice this piglet into pancetta cubes, Kevin had his mouth open. Thankfully, preserved pig brain ingested orally seemed to have a calming, subduing effect on Kevin for the last couple of classes. Is this karmic justice, or is this once again just consequences? As far as I'm concerned, Kevin reaped what he sowed. If you're going to be stupid about dissections, you're going to get gross stuff all over you. And sometimes, in your mouth, I guess. Disgusting, horrifying, revolting. But Kevin deserved it, without a doubt. I am confused, though, that someone would act like this in college. To be told, hey, don't break that piglet's skull open in a dissection class in college, it seems pretty, expected for the person to just be like, oh, you're so right, teacher, my bad. And not just do it anyway. That's pretty juvenile behavior. Not to call names or anything, but it is. It's just, behavior I'd expect from a young child, not someone in college. Anyway, that's all the time we have for stories today. There were some really satisfying moments of karma in here, huh? And don't get me wrong, I think kids deserve a lot of patience and love, and that a lot of issues can be worked out, especially as children. However, that doesn't mean that hearing these sorts of judgments being carried out, I guess, isn't still satisfying. Story 17. TLDR, super lazy, apathetic kid gets an F in my class, and that's not the worst of his problems. I once taught a grade 11 history class where I had one kid who caused me a lot of grief. He was frequently late, walking in 20 to 30 minutes late. Class was during C slot. He had a spare during B, and would actually take the bus home after his A class and simply stay home for an hour, or just did not show up at all. Additionally, he was super passive-aggressive, rarely handed in anything, and obsessed himself with spending time on his super expensive smartwatch and or phone, which is also somewhat more of a big deal as my school is in a low-middle income area, and more than half of the students can't even afford a simple phone. Anyway, I'd pretty much had it with him. A major project comes up halfway through and he doesn't bother to do any of the group work. I weight projects 50-50 personal input versus group mark, and then didn't show up for the entire week of presentations. I'd had lots of conversations with Mom at this point, who luckily had my back and was totally fed up with him too. Suffice to say, I gave him the only 0 in the class. So of course he hasn't learned and his grades are below failing mark. Test on the last unit before the exam is coming up, and I give the students the option to write a unit test and replace their lowest test grade with it. Obviously, every kid takes the chance. He saunters in late, and when I asked if he's going to do the OP test, he just said, nope. He sat down and played on his phone. I was a bit dumbfounded, but whatever. Edit. Forgot this part. He comes into class a few days later when I'm handing back tests and announces, I'm ready for my retest now, Mr. OP. I looked at him and said how he could possibly think that's an option, especially as I'm in the middle of handing out the answers. He says, oh, well, I just thought I could write it at any time. What? How would you get that idea? I say basically, oh well, you're too late. How does that feel when you shoot yourself in the foot? Hurts, I guess, huh? Later I tell him he has until the last day of classes to hand in any missed work. He had lots. Some of which he hands in 50-ish% finished at best. But that's it. Too bad. Obviously he fails his exam. He ends up with like a 45 or something. Could have failed him harder, but earlier group projects didn't have a personal input weighting like the last one did. My bad. Here's the justice. He comes to my room, literally begging me to give him a passing grade. Looks like he's ready to cry. How can I fail him? All the other teachers failed him too. Can't I at least give him a passing grade so he gets 1 credit? I hella noped. Basically said it's time to lay in the bed you made for yourself, and told him he can see himself out. Satisfying. Now, this is strange when OP mentioned that the mother was on board, because I feel like a lot of cases like this, the super spoiled kid who feels like he has no responsibility comes from an environment that kind of encourages that, right? But if the mother's like, nah, this kid needs to work, and he's still not, that's just kind of strange. I wonder what was going on with that kid. I hope he figured himself out. Story 18. In high school, we had this little crap kid named Brandon. I only had one class with him, but that class is where the story happened. It was 11th grade geography, and our teacher was one of the nicer teachers I can remember. Brandon would always push her buttons like I'm sure he did to everyone. He would never take it too far. I think he just loved the attention of getting the whole class to look at him or laugh at what he was doing. He would make little noises, tell stupid jokes during lecture, pretend to sleep and snore, and any other stupid irritating stuff you could think of. Our teacher, she was quite a patient lady, but you could tell by mid-year she had had enough of his crap. She couldn't even really punish him because Brandon loved that kind of attention and it made him all the happier. The few times he got too much, she would give him detention and a couple of times sent him to the office, which just made him more giddy. We had a very tame office staff, and they would keep him in the office for an hour or something and just to let him out. She tried everything and you could tell she was at the end of her wits. A few weeks after 9/11, some kid thought it would be funny to call in a bomb threat. They cleared the school and went locker by locker. They found nothing, of course, and we went back in. As soon as we sat down in that geography class, an office staff member came into our class and went up to our teacher and whispered something into her ear. I still remember the calm look on her face, and in the most professional way possible, she looked over at Brandon and said, "You're being called to the office." She went on with the rest of the class completely normal. They had found quite a bit of weed in Brandon's locker, and as a result, he was expelled over it. Story 19. College instructor here, was teaching English 102. Smart aleck kid was on a sports team as a student manager, and this was his life. He lived to pick up jock straps and clean lockers and all that. Well, anyway, that's fine, and I was happy for him. He sat in the front row and was always talking about stuff that happened with the team, or he was fiddling on his phone and iPod. Sometimes he was doing all of those things. He was really scattered. At this point, I wasn't really angry with him, just concerned. He was way too cool to actually do work when I gave the class time to work on their papers, and he decided he didn't need the book. I told him many times he needed to buckle down and get going. He didn't. For over half the semester, he would just get up and leave class 15 minutes in if he decided he didn't want to stay. He would make any class discussion hell for everyone else because he couldn't for some reason follow the thread of the conversation and would ask inane questions. He was also just pretty sexist and was always talking about various ways he'd cheated in class or helped other people cheat. He was so incredibly friendly, though. I told him many times he shouldn't discuss these kinds of things in front of a teacher. So finally, I'm telling the class that the last day to drop is tomorrow and blah blah blah. He comes up to me after class and asks if he should drop. I look at his grade, which is an abomination, and tell him, yes, I think the best course of action would be for him to drop. Well, he stopped coming, but he never dropped. I gave him an F. He sent me an email with a frowny face with a lot of parentheses. I mean, yeah, he got what he deserved in a way. He seems strangely clueless though. Like this is just full-on puppy dog brain, it sounds like. So friendly, so nice, but just not the brightest. Unfortunate, really. I hope he figured stuff out too. Story 20. I'm an elementary school teacher, so this doesn't seem quite as serious as the others. Here goes though. There was a problem child in my class who thought it was cool to not listen to the teacher's advice, shrug off reprimands, and make snarky comments. He was hard to manage, but by no means a bad kid. We have a rule at our school that there's no running on the deck outside of the classroom. The official reason for this is that it's dangerous, but the rule is often ignored when no teacher is looking. One day, the entire class and myself were standing out on the deck, lined up for lunch, when this particular student was coming back from getting something in the front building. He decided to blatantly ignore the no running on the deck rule he had been reminded of probably 100 times before, and began to sprint towards the class. Right as I yelled his name, he tripped and went flying. It was an epic wipeout that sent him sprawling across the deck, which the entire class saw. I checked if he was okay and didn't say anything about it at the time, but I was able to remind him later that we do have rules for a reason. I did feel, though, that justice had been served in that one delicious moment. Well, I can think of no better way to learn why there's a rule than, breaking the rule and finding out what happens. At the very least, I would be surprised if he ran on the deck again. Story 21. Elementary teacher here. My first year teaching was frickin' terrible. Really tough school combined with my rookie class management skills made for a free roaming terror class. By mid-year, I was at my wit's end, was trying to right the ship and struggling. Field trips were the worst thing I'd ever experienced. Enter my principal. He had observed my class a few weeks before, and was shocked at probably about 10 of my students' behaviors. Told me he knew I had a field trip coming up, and he would happily stay back and watch any of my students that I didn't want to go because of their behavior. So a few days before the trip, I told my class this. However, I waited until read aloud, because that's when it was the toughest. The good 12 kids in class loved to read aloud. They just wanted to enjoy the book. The other 10 to 14 would constantly goof around and not listen to a word. So I casually mentioned in the middle of read aloud that some students would be staying back from our fabulous field trip in a few days with the principal. I told them it was all behavior-based. Of course, the good kids heard me. The little craps didn't. The next 2 days, the little craps continued being little craps. The morning of the field trip, about 2 hours before, I remind the class of the principal's visit. The little craps become angels. Field trip comes, and in walks my principal. I calmly read off the list of 13 names staying, while the rest of the class comes with me. I had left the most boring worksheets possible for the kids staying behind, and as we walked out the door, all of the little craps were crying, while my principal was reading them the riot act. The remainder of my class and I had a lovely trip, enjoyed a great play. They glimpsed what school should be like, and I got the glimpse of what teaching could be. When we got back, it looked like the little craps had never stopped crying. Best day of the year. Okay, I'm a little torn on this one because on one hand, I understand the concept of retribution. Like, that was probably so satisfying. On the other hand, being happy that kids were crying the whole time you were gone seems weird behavior from a teacher. Like, I get it, but I don't know. It's a suspicious mindset to me, I guess. It's probably fine, I'm just being too sensitive. At the very least, there is no doubt this is justice. They were warned, they did not heed the warning, and they were punished. And that brings us to the end of stories. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you all in the next one.